in to this conversation tonight. Thank you for joining us on Facebook and our YouTube watchers. If you were around earlier this afternoon, you got a taste of part one of Community First Virtual Summit, and this is now part two. So I thank you for joining us for what I anticipate will be just a very phenomenal, insightful, robust conversation, because we have some great panelists here to have this dialogue with us. So if you are tuning in, if you are joining us on Facebook and on YouTube, we are here to talk about purpose in education for Hartford children. And the backdrop to that, of course, is our current context in which we are in the midst of a pandemic, but we are also in the midst of an awakening, I would say, around social justice, institutional racism, and all of the inequities and barriers to progress, to education that we at Community First School have been talking about for some time now. We had wanted to bring this type of conversation to Hartford and in dialogue with community well before all of this hit. And I feel like it's even more pressing now, and that we are in a different moment in time to have a conversation about what do we need to do in order to respond, rebuild, and reimagine education for Hartford students. So that is our theme for this evening. My name is Naisha McCauley, and I am the chair of Community First School, and I'm so thankful to be joined at the hip with someone who lives out his values about everything Community First School is striving to be for Hartford families and for Hartford kids, and that is none other than Tim Goodwin. And Tim is going to kick us off in introducing tonight's panelists, and then we are just going to jump right into this conversation. Now, we will be here until about 7:30. We do want to leave a little bit of time at the end to respond to any questions that may come in. So please, if you're joining us on Facebook or on YouTube, go ahead and join the conversation. Community First School is just about that, community. And so you are just as much as part of this conversation as everyone on the screen here right now. So we're going to respond to your questions and your comments a little bit later. But before we do that, we are going to talk about respond, rebuild, and reimagine for Hartford students. Is it time? Have we achieved? Have we arrived at a moment to achieve the equity we've been talking about for so long for Hartford students? So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we're going to get started.
All right. Thank you very much, Naisha. It's a privilege to have you as our board chair. You're courageous, you're compassionate, you're strong, and it's an honor to serve under you. I also want to acknowledge the panelists that are with us today. We are with Michelle Sinkowitz from Teach for America, Tara Spain from The Travelers and a Hartford mom, Dr. Gary Rule, Hartford physician, Dr. Stanley Battle, retired from St. Joe's, head of the sociology department, and Ms. Pat Kelly, who is the CEO of Ebony Horsewomen right down the street in Vine Street here in North Hartford. So we bring an amazing panel of people to the discussion tonight. I also want to mention that we want this discussion to be totally open and transparent. The great thing about Community First School is that we are an independent model. We do not take funds from the city or the state, and that means we have a voice. You know, I've been in education for about 30 years, and when I was principal, I was a teacher for 18, administrator for more than 10. When I was principal, I often heard, people saying they wanted us to be transparent. So we would talk to students about things like structured racism or things that we may be discussing today. And I can tell you almost every time within 24 hours, I got a phone call that said, you need to stop, you need to tone it down. There's a culture of fear that exists in public education, fear of repercussion. We don't have that. But we do need your support in order to keep that. because not being funded by the state or the city means that we need individual donations from courageous corporations, like-minded foundations, and individuals like yourselves. So we will be having a text to donate up tonight throughout the conversation. Just got to take care of this housekeeping before we get started. In order to keep our autonomous voice, we need your help. If you would text the number 44-321, we'll take a couple of pauses tonight to see how we're doing, and text capital CFS-2020. You will receive a link, and that link will enable you to make a donation at some point. We started out today with a good amount of money through the sponsorship of St. Francis Health, Trinity Health. They kicked us off with a great donation. Carlos Brown was on the line today with us from St. Francis. Now we want to try to match that either tonight or by the end of the week. This link will stay up. So we'd like to be able to match that at some point soon. So again, 44321, text CFS-2020 to get us started. So I will take that graphic off the screen now so we can get back to our panelists. And we want to kick it off with Ms. Pat Kelly. This afternoon we spoke with Nicholas Pierce, and he talked about purpose in education. He talked about a reason for being. He talked about how we need to create that passion within students that is not necessarily there in public education today. And I wanted to ask you what you see, because you work with students every day in the summer, you work with them during the school year, and you notice some of that lack of passion. You notice how they're not always excited about school, and we need to try to change that. So I'm wondering if you might want to start us off commenting a little bit about how you see school and how you could see it improve. This is about responding to the pandemic and the situation that we see across the nation culturally, and also then rebuilding and reimagining. So I'm going to let you kick it off.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, great. So there's been a phenomenon happening in the school system for a very, very, very long time. And it's more predominant with young boys than it is with girls. Although it happens for girls, it happens a little bit longer down the line. So what you see is that kindergarten, they're excited to go to school. They love going to school. They love their teacher. Everything is wonderful. Second grade, third grade, fourth grade, not so much. Fifth grade, not in love with school at all. Can't stand the teachers. Doesn't like what's happening. Begin to fall off and become disinterested in education. Behavior begins to be a problem in the school, the classroom, and it goes on from there. So the question becomes, what's happening? What's happening in those classrooms, in the atmosphere, that is making these kids separate from education? What is it? Is it that they're not prepared from grade to grade to grade, and they get lost and they get disgruntled with it? Is it that the expectations of them is not there? Is it that the interest of teachers, their ability to teach is not there? Well, it could be all of the above. And by the time these young men get to 7th grade, many of them, they're done. They're done. And so the structure of school has been revamped and revamped. I know that the city of Hartford has had a tremendous number of superintendents, and they all come in with their own structure as how they're going to do it. I'm going to do it better. But they still fall into the same pattern, the same system. Now, there are a lot of nuances in this that can affect education. It could be health. It could be kids not getting a good breakfast, not sleeping well the night before, need glasses, a lot of different things. And therapy. And you know I'm going to go there. A lot of these kids come from home situations, not a lot, too many, come from home situations where it's less than desired. Some of the kids are in shelters. Some are sleeping on relatives' couches and whatnot. So all of these things are a factor, but I think the largest factor is the makeup of the educational system. They lose kids through the gaps, beginning third, fourth, fifth grade, and they never seem to regain the ground. Now, that's not all kids, but it's too many of them. They get caught up in this. So I really don't have an answer for that. But, Tim, a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, I tell you, time is just of no consequence to me. Pastor Johnson, A.J. Johnson, gave us this wonderful story about babies floating down the river. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do it. I'm going to let you do that one because you may do it better than me. But it's not, why are we getting the babies out of the river and then providing food and water and whatever they need, clothing? Let's find out why they're in the river in the first place. So I think that's what we have to look at. We have to look at the structure that's just not working. So that's my take on it.
I was thinking about what you were saying of that transition that you see happening, from kindergarten to fourth grade. And I wanted to throw this to Michelle to speak to this overall system that our kids are trapped in, basically, and what you see happening with students going through those phases. Like kindergartners come in, they love it, but then something is happening gradually over that period of time where now they hate it. What do you see happening that would what is causing that transition?
Yeah, thank you so much, Naisha, for tossing it to me. I work, as Tim said, for Teach for America, and I also do the Roots Conference, which is like a youth development, youth leadership conference. So I work with our young people in Hartford a lot, and I am super passionate about youth development. Honestly, from a systemic perspective, I mean, the system itself is racist, and that's me. I know I have a privilege with my white woman identity saying that, but I think it's really important, especially for white allies and co-conspirators, to say that. The system is not inviting for our young people, particularly our Black and brown young people, because it was never really designed for them. And the structural racism in our education system is historic. It's embedded in every state in the whole country. And when a system, even when there's incredible people, well-intentioned people, and beautiful things happening, there are certain policies and procedures in the larger system that just message to our young people that it is not for them, whether it's in the curriculum not being representative of their lived experience or their identity, whether it's rules that really need you to be silent and sitting still, which is very white dominant culture in nature, and learning can happen when it's loud and it's fun and it's creative and you're bringing in music and many different elements. And I actually think that would be better education for all students. But those subtle messages are some of the small things that disinvest our students, not even to mention our students are more likely to be punished, 3.6 times more likely to be suspended for the same reason. So if you think about it, if at school you're consistently being noticed for the things you're doing wrong, but none of the things you're doing right, that's going to cause a disinvestment. And not to mention just our overall, the messages in society. And so I think really creating space for our young people to believe in themselves and to be to feel loved and understand their immense potential that they have, because all of them have it. If school really focused on helping to bring that out of them and unlock that and for them to see it in themselves, then our young people would stay engaged in school. Kids love learning. They do, all of them. And so it's not our kids. It's definitely the system at B.
I've noticed that doesn't just happen in fifth grade anymore. It used to be the trend that by fifth grade students were disengaged, and you could talk about the Eurocentric nature of education and the fact that we are not really meeting students where they are in terms of their context, their ethnicities, their cultures, their backgrounds, the community that they live in. But I think it's happening even earlier now. I notice it in first and second grade where students are disengaged almost immediately and falling behind almost immediately. So I think this is an issue that's extremely important. What have you noticed, Tara, as a parent in Hartford Public Schools? What are some things, and it really could go for any district, what are some areas that are concerning to you at this stage as a mom?
Yeah, and I wanted to just say too that I am here speaking as a Hartford parent, not as a Travelers employee. So I just wanted to put that out there. I live in West Hartford, and I intentionally send my kid to school in Hartford, and there's some really intentional reasons for me doing that. But to your point, Tim, and to Michelle's point about students becoming disenfranchised and disengaged early, I've seen it already. My daughter is in second grade. It does come down to a lot of the practices that are done in the classroom and some of the harm that's done in the classroom. To give you an example of that, last year my daughter was in first grade. She got into a little bit of trouble. It was an event that was at the school. I think it was a parent-teacher conference. They asked us to bring the kids in. I brought my daughter. They said, let them run free or whatever. And then the next day we get a call that my daughter and her friend decided to get into a little trouble. They went into the classroom and they decided to turn the books over. So not excusing the behavior at all, and we dealt with it in the home, whatever. But a couple of days later, I get an email from the school saying that the course of action that they wanted to take was to have my daughter sit down with someone from the juvenile justice system. This is I said, hell no. I wanted to say F no, but I said, nope, we're not doing that. And those are the kind of practices that harm children, right? Like you're the one to introduce my 6-year-old to the juvenile justice system. Not because, you think that, she's some criminal right now, but those are the kind of covert things that happen that build over time. So that's just one example. I could tell you lots of other examples of my daughter is a high performer and not being called on in the classroom because the teacher says, oh, well, you need to let other people answer. So she feels silenced in the classroom. Or if people say things to her, then she says something back, she's the one who gets in trouble. I've intentionally said, well, if somebody says something like that to you, here's how you might be able to respond. But if I say that, I'm going to get in trouble. So I'm starting to already recognize a lot of the practices. And as a parent, I think it's very important for me to feel empowered to be able to go into school and to advocate for my child and to speak for my child when I don't think that things are handled properly. I've also been silenced. I've been given the blank stares, like, who are you to come and advocate for your child? We got this. This is our building. Go home. Those are the kind of practices I think that are very harmful that need to change.
You mentioned a couple of things there. I want to call out corporations because we've been watching failing school systems for years, and we continue to pour money into that system knowing it's failing. We're just now starting to listen to the talk about the structured racist practices that you just talked about, but yet we continue to fund those systems. What are we funding? Are we funding failure? Are corporations in this city funding failure? And don't they know that they're funding failure, but that they continue to do it? So I have to ask myself the question, are we funding failure purposefully because we don't want those young men and women coming into the workforce? And if we know they're going to be compliant and pacified, and we know they're going to go into low-wage service jobs, then the corporations in town don't ever have to really worry about dealing with them. And we can always just keep them sort of on the periphery. That's how it almost seems to me. So I understand you speaking as a mom. I'll say the hard things to the corporations because I think it's time for them to start listening. And when you talk about individualized learning, at Community First School, we want to teach each individual student based upon their greatness and capacity. And you're talking about a gifted and talented student who is silenced. Why not find a way to let that gifted and talented person teach in the classroom or do something that elevates her? And how about that? A young black female leading in the classroom. That would be more important to a lot of the students than anything else that could be done if we were willing to look at each person's individual greatness. Stanley, you may want to jump in here because I think you may have some things to say about these concepts we've been talking about.
Well, there's so much. The structure of education is really built on finance. So each child represents a commodity or a revenue stream. That's within the public education system. When a child is born into a family, it's going to cost about $233,000 to prepare that child from birth until he or she graduates from high school. Then once they go on into a four-year institution, if they so desire, you're looking at about another $140,000 over 4 years, at approximately $20,000 a year, $15,000 for room and board, gives you a round figure of $140,000. Round figure total of $373,610. That's the commodity of a child, if you want to look at it that way. But when a child comes into a public school system, whether urban school system, whether it's Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, or Waterbury, and I've been all over the country, these problems that Hartford faces are not unusual and are standard. Unfortunately, race is the great divider. It seems to be okay for that brown or black child not to be reading at grade level. The child may come in behind, unfortunately. So are they going to catch up in kindergarten? In kindergarten, I've had the opportunity, my wife and I have adopted kindergarten classes in several school systems, have worked with them all year. They have to read in kindergarten. They have to write a complete sentence before they go on to first grade. I know that was the case 2-3 years ago. So once they get out of kindergarten, they should be really moving. The challenge is what happens at home, what happens in the community. How is that going to be supported at home? You almost need like a point guard. Typically that point guard, if you look at a basketball scenario, could be mom, could be dad, could be grandma, got to be somebody. Could be 2-on-1, 2 adults on that child to provide the discipline and rigor that's necessary for the child to compete. But in Hartford, you can go from Hartford to some of the suburban school districts, some of the urban school districts, and you see this great divide. Case in point, when an entire class is reading below grade level and no one is concerned, that's a catastrophe. And when you look out and see all the children that are brown and black, you have to ask yourself, is that on purpose? If it's not corrected, then you're setting them up, because by third grade, they need to be able to read. They need to be able to think creatively. They need to be able to problem solve so they can begin to prepare themselves. That doesn't happen by third grade. They're going to constantly be behind. Don't want to get personal. And just for point of correction, I retired from the University of St. Joseph. I was the founding director of the graduate program in social work, the MSW program. And we had the best diversity on the campus. But what seems to be in higher education, I've seen it, been everywhere around the country, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Boston University, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I've been a president and chancellor. You'd be surprised, and maybe you wouldn't be surprised, at faculty members that are biased against students that are coming in who are not prepared. And the universities and colleges don't have the resources to better prepare them. So it's almost like a setup. So they come in, they struggle with their writing, they struggle with some other skills. If the support is provided while they're there, they can make it, and many of them do. But the numbers of brown and black children that decide once they go into a 4-year program that drop out of their program really seems to be paramount and complement what they didn't get when they were in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. When the child is born, the preparation from birth to kindergarten is extremely important. It is extremely important because once they hit kindergarten, it's on. And you build from there. Of course, that magic has to take place in the classroom with a creative teacher. But also you need that point person, and that's the parent or parents, grandma, grandpa, the man next door, whoever, who's going to support that child when that child comes home. Because then you have to follow up and ask them, what did you do today? What did you learn? Can we go over that together? Forget about TV. There's nothing on TV anyway. It's so important to provide that discipline from home through the community to school. And I'll end with this point. I have an identical twin brother. He was a smart one, and I was a stupid one. I was the one who was directed for special education. My mother came in and said, "Get him the hell out of there." I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. She saved my life. Not bad for someone who didn't do too well. Got 4 degrees, 2 master's degrees, a bachelor's degree, and a PhD. Not bragging. Somebody made a mistake. It made me mad.
Well, Dr. Stanley, I got to tell you 2 things. Back in the 50s, when they came through the Hartford public school system and did the IQ test. And I remember it vividly. My mom, God bless her, kept that thing for a long time, and she would pull it up every now and then and say, "You better not believe this." So I was rated at borderline retarded, number one. And we're still doing that. We're still testing our kids one way or the other and dictating where they are. 2 other things. You mentioned the commodity of revenue that a child generates by going through the school system. Well, there's another commodity that same child generates, and it's called school to prison pipeline. There is a great amount of money that follows these kids that don't make it in schools straight to prison, and that fuels another economy.
Correct.
I don't want to start talking about conspiracy, but you can't kind of get around it, that some of our kids are just pinpointed for that. And there's another element here. This is not going to go over well. But I have seen it time and time and time again, and I'm going to tell you how I've seen it through the kids that come to the barn. There's a hue color problem. The lighter you are, the better you're treated. The darker you are, the worse you're treated. And that's by any ethnicity teacher. Any. There are kids that come to the barn. I remember and I'm going to tell you what we do to keep track of our kids. Summer would come and they work as counselors. And now we get this big fight about who's going to work outside. I want to work in the building or in the arena. Well, why? It's better in the arena. You don't have to work as hard. I don't want to be outside. I don't want to be outside. Well, why? And it took me a long time to dig through that for them to tell me, I don't want to get dark. And they couldn't articulate why they didn't want to get darker, but they had met with some things that said, the darker I am, the worse I get treated. And it took me 2 or 3 years to get them to be able to find it, that just being dark is not a great thing. So that's going on in the school system. So in terms of that community piece that you talk about, when that child gets home, we track our kids. We track them. If they're in our program, we track them. We track them with an app that's called 360. I know where they are every minute of the day. And we have information going to the schools that when report cards come out, we know what they get. We know what they're going to get before they know what they're going to get. So you're right. You've got to have that. So that's that community piece that you're talking about.
I want to jump in and just say give 2 really quick stories that are really important. You know, I've said this before. When the IQ test first came out, that was kind of the beginning of the standardized test. And that was purposeful during the era of eugenics, when it was scientific. Like we always talk about how important science is. Well, science used to try to prove that white folk were smarter than black folk. And the standardized test was part of the eugenics movement to try to prove that white populations were smarter than black populations. There was no consideration of the preparation prior to. You know, I often say that we take our students and imagine being a swim instructor. You don't teach the student to swim, but then you throw them in the water and you want to see what happens. It's the same thing with testing. We're not preparing our students well, but then we test them anyway. I believe it's to show an achievement gap. It's not to say, is there an achievement gap? No, we know there's going to be one. We set it up to try to create one, and then we try to prove that certain populations aren't as smart anymore. These are the kind of things that have been happening for centuries that have to end now at this time in our history if we're going to make real progress. So I want to affirm that, what you said about the IQ test. You are brilliant, Pat. It's never too late to say it, and I know you already know it, but what a disgrace that our society would try to use a test or a special education label just to try to keep one structure in power. That's disgraceful. The second thing I want to mention is when I was principal, I can remember we were giving students voice, and we were giving all students a chance to lead in the classroom, lead assemblies, just become leaders within the community. And it was incredibly difficult for, and I'm just going to put this out, you went there, Pat, so I'm going to say you opened a door. It was very difficult for my white staff to accept black student leadership. And I can remember one day I came in early in the morning, and there was a counselor there who had been in education in the city for 20 years. And she met me at my doorway. She brought me into the office. She's crying desperately. She's wondering, how could I possibly give these students the opportunity to leave? They didn't deserve it, were her words. And then the words that got me, and I don't believe this is just an isolated incident. I believe this is a problem in urban education throughout the nation. But she said, whose side are you on, Principal Goodwin, black or white?
Wow.
That was real.
Oh, wait a minute.
We have Dr. Gary Rule with us, and I want to make sure his voice is a part of this discussion right here. So I'm sorry, I had to interject on that because in keeping with our theme of this summit and thinking about responding, I think we're laying the foundation for all the things that we need to respond to. Mm-hmm. But I want to give Dr. Rule an opportunity to talk about the health side of how we need to be responding. And I think it's just, in health is our physical health, right? But I'm thinking, Pat, also with the trauma, like health is encompassing all of those things. But Dr. Rule, I wanted to bring you into the conversation and thinking about how are we responding and in this moment to a very real crisis in health right now.
Thank you, Naisha. That's a great question. And so a lot of the previous talkers kind of said the issue, right? So, I mean, this pandemic, I think, has exposed the fact that, one, dealing with uncertainty. So you have an infection, and humans have always basically dealt with nature, sometimes very violently, right? So they've always been infections, they've always been pandemics. And I think what this has really taught us, including the children, is really how to cope with adversity and dealing with uncertainty. But I think it also has taught us agency, right? So specifically for young children, they really do have a lot of control over their lives, despite what teachers say. But you really do also need that support system, as Dr. Battle was saying, to reframe and so that you understand your person, who you are, in terms of your ability to affect your neighborhood. But in terms of agency, you realize you have a lot of control. So even though it's an infection, if you practice some things, hand washing, physical distancing, social distancing, just a lot of health behaviors, you can control a lot of what you're experiencing in your life. The other thing I think it kind of brings out is the fact that that period of curiosity. So the infection hits, nobody knows what it is, and it teaches us to think through problems, to be methodical, to get facts, and then you also have these experts and other people who are saying one thing works, one thing doesn't work. I think it also helps you with conflict resolution. But as a young person, as a young child, you really can't do that by yourself. You really do need that point guard, as Dr. Battle said, to help you kind of maneuver through these systems. But every single adversity that you have is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And it also teaches you about teamwork, right? So if you're a young person, a young child, a lot of us learn by ourselves, but a lot of us also learn in groups, with your friends, with an older sibling, and that's also very helpful.
Naisha, would you like to speak a little bit to the fact that we will be working with the entire family, the whole family model at Community First School, as we seek to open in spite of COVID by creating these safety measures on August 31st?
Absolutely. And definitely want to tease out a little bit of the individualized aspects of how we're working with community. But part of all the things that have been laid out before in this conversation, what's necessary to create an environment where everyone thrives. So how do we create an environment where the children are thriving? Well, you have to create an environment where the parents are thriving. And so the community first model looks at the entire family and gives parents that voice at the leadership table. I'm going to pull in a little bit of what Dr. Battle said on our practice session because it's something that stayed with me about who controls your education. You know, who has that control? Are we in control of our education? And I was really reflecting on that, and parents having a position, having that agency, having a leadership role, creates those conditions where we do this as a community. You know, and so that absolutely is foundational to community first model. Without the parents, we have no community. You know, without partners like Ebony Horsewomen, we don't have community. So without all of these foundational pieces together, this is not going to work. And we see the evidence of that reflected right now. It's just not working because we've excluded people. We've stripped personhood from people. Like, we've done all these things to break us down and destroy us. And you're seeing the evidence and the outcomes of what that system produces. So we're starting at the foundation with all of these pillars, and parents and family is a pillar.
And, you know, that's a very important kind of structure you're talking about, Naisha. Stanley, do you remember Marva Collins in Chicago?
Absolutely. She's a legend.
She's an absolute legend.
She's a legend, and she did it in the classroom.
And well, she started out in her house.
She was fabulous. Go ahead. She's fabulous.
Absolutely. And what she created in that classroom, in her home, she started there, was this nurturing and empowerment of that you are smart enough. And you, this is not beyond you. And I marvel. I just need to say, if anyone ever wanted to have a nice movie night, I'm not sure if her movie is still out there about Marva Collins. Rent it. You could see what this woman did with nothing. We talk about funding, millions of dollars to educate. She had nothing, and her children were outpacing kids in high school. Her elementary kids were outpacing kids in high school. So it's not really the funding. Maybe it's not even the building. It is the structure that you put around this child to nurture this child. And you have to look at this child as a whole child. It's not just can you read, write, and spell. It is, are you eating? And a lot of these kids come from communities where it's a food desert. You know, are you getting health care? Have you had an examination? Have anyone checked your ears? Can you hear me when I'm telling you to pick up your pencil and let's start? Can you hear me? Can you see what I have on the board? All of those things need to be provided for these kids, and that sometimes that's the last thing that we go to. It's just that you just acting out in class. You just don't want to pay attention. Maybe the kid can't hear. Maybe he can't see. So that structure is really important. And let's be real. Let's be real here. It would be nice if we knew that a lot of these kids went home to a supportive environment. I would love to think that is not the case. So oftentimes, a school like Community First is going to have to take that place. It's going to have to take that place. And unfortunately, there's not enough time in the day and not enough money to go backwards and try to bring that parent along. You just don't have that kind of capability. So the structure that Community First puts in place is going to give that child that padding and that structure to make it. Even when home may not be, for whatever reason, all that it could be.
I'd add, though, that with Community First School, they don't have to do everything, but to be able to recognize that kids present with with some of the concerns you have. And a lot of them really have trauma. And so you don't have to do everything for that child, but be able to recognize what some of those issues are and refer them appropriately to the persons in the community who will actually help them. Because you can't do it all.
I wanted to just thank you, Dr. Rule. We're about 6 minutes. It's about 6:42, so we're about 42 minutes in, and we've been doing a great job of looking at the sort of responding to the issues that we see in education today. And I thought Pat did a nice segue into what we're trying to do tonight. Marva Collins had students reading the Iliad and the Odyssey in like first grade. She was amazing. And Naisha, we're also trying to raise a little bit of money tonight, so I thought maybe you could just speak to that. We have a graphic on the screen right now that addresses how you can make a donation now to the work that we're trying to do in the community.
So if you are just joining this conversation, Community First School is here talking about purpose in education, but we're also, the theme of tonight is respond, rebuild, and reimagine. And we are taking the lead, if you will, here in Hartford in reimagining a purpose-driven education for Hartford students. And we are opening a school in North Hartford. We actually signed the lease. We are moving into the newly redeveloped Swift Factory complex. So please, if you haven't been over to Westland, to the Five Corners lately, drive on over, because it is not just Community First School that's being reimagined, but some really great folks are working on reimagining that entire area. So the Swift Factory is going to encompass a lot of different aspects. Community First School is going to reside in that place. But in order to do that and to build this model out that we are talking about right now, we do need your support. And that's what the text to give will enable you to do. So
make sure when you type it in, it's 44-321, and it's a capital CFS with a dash 2020. Some people forgot the dash and they didn't get the link. So it's capital CFS dash 2020. Naisha, you and I had talked about the next part of the discussion really being about rebuilding and reimagining. We've addressed some of the structured racism and outright racism that exists in school. We've addressed concerns with COVID-19. We've addressed the business of failure. We've been very honest and transparent about some of the stuff we've seen in the community and in our school systems. How do we start to rebuild that? And I think we can go back to Tara. As a mom, what would you want to see if we were to, Dr. Nicholas Pierce said today, what were his words, Naisha? He said we need to demolish and re-architect school. Really? And so if you were going to demolish and re-architect school, Tara, how would you start that as a mom here in Hartford?
So, I would probably start at the end and look at, who and what I want a child to be, or my child to be as an adult. And then I would work backwards on what we need to put into place and to be able to build that. And so when I think about, and because a lot of the conversation earlier today was around purpose, and I think about purpose and what I want my daughter to be, there's really a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that she's happy, first of all, that she's able to pursue her dreams, to go into whatever profession that she so chooses, that she has all the skills and the preparation to be able to do that, but that she's able to do that with very little obstacles, whether that's self-imposed obstacles because of not believing in herself or whatever. I don't want her to have any of those self-imposed obstacles, or also obstacles from society. So that's really important to me. I think the other part is that, we spend a lot of time in my household talking about kindness. And I think that's something that's really important right now. And I know the speaker earlier today also talked about the moral imperative around education and making sure that we have, that people have a global mindset and all of that. That's really important to me too. And making sure that, my daughter can have civil discourse with people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, that she understands her role in society and that she feels empowered. And then through that empowerment, that she can empower other people. So those are two things that are important. So how do we get to building that? I'm not an expert. but as a parent, and I love that you guys are engaging parents' voices and building what you're building. I think that's important. Safety first and foremost, and not just in terms of her physical being, even though that's really important, but safety in terms of her social emotional health, and like being free from some of the harms that we've already talked about. I think the second thing is academic rigor. I mean, we can't not have this conversation without talking about academic rigor, not for the sake of taking IQ tests or not for the sake of taking standardized tests, but again, just being able to make sure that they are prepared, that she's prepared and have those skills to be able to pursue what it is that she wants to pursue. And it has to be well-rounded. It has to be a well-rounded curriculum. It can't just be such a focus on, math, the science, and reading, although we can all agree that those things are foundational. There needs to be something much more well-rounded, enriching, going out into the community. I will say that the school that she goes to now does a really good job of that part, engaging the community. They have a gardening program. The students are, going to theater and that kind of thing. I think that's really important. They take Chinese and are learning foreign language very early on. So that's important, that kind of well-roundedness. We've already talked about a lot of the other things. Again, like parents, like that the parents have a voice at the table. But one of the other things that has become really apparent to me, that I will be honest that, when I decided to send my daughter to a school with other Black and brown kids, because that's what I wanted for her. And, the district that we live in West Hartford is not as diverse. I made that conscious decision. I didn't recognize that I was still going to have conversations around cultural competency. It was just something that I assumed that was going to happen. And so being in an environment that has cultural competent teacher staff is really important to me. My daughter had an incident where lots of incidents happen, where during Black History Month or Martin Luther King Day, another kid said, well, I don't like Black people and I don't care about Black people in the classroom. And the situation really wasn't handled by teachers. And when I had a teacher conference and I addressed it and I said, well, what are you doing with conversation? And she said, I haven't. I didn't know I'm not equipped to be able to have that kind of conversation. How do you have people working around Black and brown kids that don't know how to have a dialogue around race and racism? That would have been a beautiful opportunity to have a dialogue with all of those young kids. I'm not mad at a 6-year-old or whatever age he was for saying what he said. It was a missed opportunity. That's important to me.
Michelle, I see you over there. You're like, yes. So please come in at this point, and we're talking about rebuilding and reimagining. Like, what needs to happen? Like, does every teacher need this cultural competency training, or we just need to start at a different point? Like, before you become a teacher, there is a different way that you enter this system. Like, what really needs to happen here, Michelle? Not the soft edges around this, but like what really needs to happen?
Oh man, I don't know if I feel equipped to answer that question. I am not an expert by any means. But I appreciate you tossing it my way so I can share my opinion, I guess. And if anyone else wants to jump in, please feel free. I was just really nodding because I think one of the things I've realized is the fact that currently, like, all teachers, administrators, anyone working in our school system with our young people, and I don't just mean in our predominantly Black and brown communities, I mean across the country, in every community, affluent, low income, white, Black, brown, Asian. This right now, the burden of like solving this educational inequity issue is on our communities where it is most impacting our young people. But I think overall we won't change as a society until cultural competence and like racial equity conversations, training are actually happening everywhere. So that's I was just nodding along with Tara because I am sorry that happened and that it was a missed opportunity, and I'm unfortunately not surprised. And that's something that does need to change. Hold on. If someone else wants to take it, my dog's going to start barking for a second.
I'll just say, I will say that what I appreciate about the response from the teacher was that it was an honest response. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't, she didn't throw it back on my daughter. She didn't throw it back on me. She was quite honest, and she said, you know what, I need to do my own reading and own research, which said to me that there's a gap in terms of what type of training and support that teachers are being provided around, diversity and being able to empower and talk to Black and brown children.
There is an issue here with this cultural competency, because if you don't understand Black and brown children and how they respond in different circumstances, they're going to be misread all the time. I believe that there are a lot of kids out there right now that's diagnosed with ADD and ADHD and all the other Ds that are misdiagnosed, and that they're diagnosed like this because no one has really understood the culture where they come from. So in therapy, we understand that there are two major responses to kids, particularly the kids who are under trauma. They either got too much mouth or they got no mouth. They got either explode on you or they implode. They surrender or they blow you up. And you got to understand that. And if you understand our kids, then you don't send them to the office. You take them outside and say, hey, what's up? What's up today? You know what? And give them a chance. But if you don't have that cultural competency or cultural humility, our kids get punished over and over. They get misdiagnosed. My brother called me about, 6 months ago. And he said, you know what, Pat? I think I had ADD when I was a kid. I said, well, why? Why do you think you had ADD? He said, because Mama would send me to the store for 3 things and I forget 2 of them. I said, well, maybe you did. But the difference between back then and now, in talking about the structure of schools, we had recess. We ran home for lunch, came back. There were sports. All of the neighborhoods had some sporting team. There's a lot of things that we had back then that's just not there now. A lot of kids are in the class for 6 hours a day now, wanting to be made to be quiet, when they got all this young blood running through them. And how do you do that? Well, then you diagnose them as ADD, and that carries throughout their life. So, with Community First School, these kids are going to get out into the community. They're going to get out and see nature. They're going to go out and visit other kinds of environments. I know about 2 years ago, we had a chicken that had an egg stuck in her. And our science teacher, a young lady who actually came through our program, came and she operated on this chicken. The kids were fascinated. Took the egg out, cleaned it out. It was horrible. It was nasty. But got the egg out of her and sewed up. You know how you make a chicken go to sleep? Nobody knows? Turn them upside down. And they go to sleep. And when the chicken would sleep, she operated on the chicken, got the egg out. And 4 kids came up to us afterwards and said, I want to be a vet. I want to be. It was a nasty, nasty operation. But 4 of them said, I want to be a vet. And we said, vet.
I want to just piggyback on what Ms. Kelly said. So, just for the sciences, right? So the curriculum also needs to reflect the history of the African Americans in this country. So our history is not only that we were enslaved 400 years ago. There are persons who, if you watch Hidden Figure, right? So you have a woman who's a mathematician who worked on the statistics for the rocket to go to the moon. If you get a blood transfusion, that's a Black person who actually did that. Every time you drive your car and you look at a traffic light, a Black person actually developed the three lights for that. I mean, we have contributed to every single aspect of American history. And what I really, really want to say is, truthfully, the global economy has been built on the backs of the Black people. Nobody wants to say that, but really that's true. We did the work for nothing. The history that we need to be taught in school, I shouldn't have to get to 30 to realize that there's a person like a hidden figure. Or when I'm 20, I understand what Juneteenth is. Part of that history really needs to be taught in school. And our history is not only that we were enslaved. we have contributed to every single aspect of American life. Anything, music, art, theater, the sciences, really everything. And that's not taught. I wasn't taught that. What I taught was Columbus came, discovered America, right? Even though they were Native Americans living here, but he was the person who said he discovered it. And the history it's all Eurocentric. That has to change, because I think for us to really, for young persons, to feel self-confidence and self-worth, you have to know the history of what your ancestors have contributed to, not only to the U.S., but really globally. So that should be part of the curriculum as well.
Well, you're right, Dr. Wu, because a lot of the textbook information is from the white perspective. And you're not in there. So you're either an afterthought or you had nothing to do with any of this. So that needs to change as well.
That is so true.
One of the focuses that can
ask
go ahead.
questions. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Things, I don't want to keep getting on describing the problem, but one of the things that I feel like I keep hearing as a repeated theme is that there's this culture of low expectations, and there's low expectations for our kids, and I have stories about that too. But how do you change that piece, Tim? Like, how are you planning to, within your curriculum, within your training, or the teachers that you plan to bring on, and in your school, how do you change that? And even in public schools too, right? Because even some of the most well-intended people that think that they're doing good by setting these low expectations are doing harm. How do you change that mindset around low expectations?
I want to toss that to Dr. Battle, but I also want to just make two comments first around that question. First of all, Pat Kelly put me on to Marva Collins 2 years ago. There's so much as a white person growing up in America you're not taught, and we're at a disadvantage as well, because all this great black history, we're not taught it either. So we're taught to be racist. When you start to see it, now you start to figure out, wait a minute, what I was taught, was it real? And you start to figure out there's a lot of people in this country that have done amazing things that I wasn't taught even through college. I made it through, I was a history major in college and didn't learn about Frederick Douglass or Malcolm X or any of those are the basics, let alone Stokely Carmichael or anybody else that was a little even more radical. So there's also another piece here, and that so Marva Collins is someone who just said, you know what, this is the standard, this is the high expectation, and you're going to do it because you're valuable and you have the capacity. And we don't even give our students the chance to explore their capacity. We teach them to be compliant, passive performers. And there's no way you're ever going to touch the greatness in someone if that's your expectation. And the other piece is, Pat was talking about how you deal with a student if they misbehave a little bit. I could tell you that a student in Hartford is going to be treated very differently than a student in a suburban neighborhood. I've been in both. The only time I ever had any, I don't know if I should go here, but I'm going to say it. I never had anything stolen when I was in Hartford. Drug arrests per 1,000 students are higher in Glastonbury and Simsbury than they are in Hartford. But there's this narrative that somehow things are better there. No, the kids were as wild or wilder in a suburban school where I taught. They were just treated differently. They were given more opportunities. Their discipline was less harsh. And there was this expectation that, it's just a kid being a kid. But in Hartford, it's this major problem. So that's racist right there, and we have to think through. We have to treat everyone the same, or we have to understand that there's a context of the students we serve. I'll tell you one thing. The students that I worked with at Weaver High School were more intelligent, more resilient, and more disciplined than the students I dealt with in the suburban neighborhoods. Hands down, no questions asked. That's not known. People don't know that. The narrative is very different. But Stanley, I'll let you jump in as well, because I feel like you're sort of in this arena as well.
What's that?
I'm just saying, I was just letting you jump in on this too, because I feel like...
Oh, you want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, in building the mosaic, and particularly we keep talking about brown and black, we don't all come, just because you're brown and black doesn't mean you're African American. Hartford is rich with Caribbean, African, and it goes on and on, multiple languages. So I hope that the school will be reflective of the population that you're serving. For instance, this is a very rich committee. You can bring some people in to present to the children, give them a different perspectives. For instance, what does an epidemiologist do? What does a biostatistician do? I have a degree in public health. When I sat in the great University of Pittsburgh and I sat in epidemiology, and they started throwing all that data around, they were talking about us, and it was all negative. But Dr. Rychek and Dr. Culler didn't necessarily say color. They just said, well, African Americans are here. We were dying at a faster rate than everyone else. We had cancer. We had more cancer. Lord have mercy, I'm going to die. There were like 8 of us in that class. There were 150 students in that class, and there were 8 of us. We were African American, and Caribbean. We stuck together like white on rice. We prayed together. We got through the class. I love the class because it opened up things to me that I had never imagined before. Able to look at qualitative versus quantitative. You can start that in kindergarten. You'd be amazed and surprised what the children can do if you expose them to content that is beyond supposedly their grasp. They will fool you. So I think that's first and foremost. The second thing is, which is extremely important, and you're talking about it, and that is making sure that family members are involved. But I think it's hopefully no one will get mad. They need to see men. They need to see that there are men who, they don't have to have a PhD. They work. They take care of their families. They're responsive and they're present. They need to just see that there are men in the community that they can trust. The women are amazing, so are the men. The third thing I think is extremely important because we are in a technology age is the ability to deal with technology and take advantage of it. Khan Academy, I happen to like Khan Academy. I looked at Khan Academy for advanced calculus. And the way he broke it down, I wish he was doing that when I was taking calculus. It was amazing how Khan broke it down step by step. So there are some learning tools through technology that the children can use. However, they have to have the tools. So in other words, the notebooks, the computers are going to be extremely necessary because they're going to be exposed to that if they want to continue their education. Last but not least, and I love the word, the focus on respect and feeling good about yourself. No child should ever be told that he's stupid. No child should ever be disrespected. If you create an environment which is supportive, you'll be amazed at how far and how quickly those children can go. Don't cheat them. Don't assume because they're in Hartford that they can't do it. Assume they can do it a little bit more. And one other thing, I happened to study at Juilliard with some wonderful local folks when I was in college, Amherst. And I happened to do a master class with William Warfield, great bass, sang in the Metropolitan Opera. And I actually got to know him. He could speak multiple languages. He was a fantastic vocalist, bass. But what I was amazed about, what amazed me about him was his ability to look at the entire world. So I end with that point. Make sure that the children realize there's more to the world than just Hartford. Open up the world to them. That's extremely important.
Can I add one thing? Is that okay? My
Please.
dog has calmed down, so. But in terms of the expectations for our young people and high expectations, it's so funny because I used to just always think like, well, yeah, like if they could just pass the state test, and I've realized now, like, just even that part of the system we need to reevaluate and rethink because it's just grounded in white dominant culture, and it's like, wow, is passing a standardized test to like play the game, to be able to have doors open? Do we even want to aim for that? So I ask like all of these questions, but I think people are unaware, or like they often say, oh, we need a differentiator, we need to give remediation or make it easier for the students because they're just so far behind. And I really disagree with that. I taught 7th grade math. And my students were, I didn't teach in Hartford, I taught in Liberty City in Miami, but I live in Hartford now. And my students were at a second grade math level. And by the end of the year in 7th grade, out of 120 students, I only had about 20 students not pass the state test at grade level. So they grew like 5 years in 1 year. And that isn't because I was an incredible teacher. It's because I believed in them and I helped them to believe in themselves, and they were that smart. Like, they had that potential within them, and they're extremely intelligent, and so I do think whatever bar we set, kids will meet the bar and rise to the occasion because it messages belief in them, which helps them to have belief in themselves. And our young people, like, having that belief in themselves is one of the most crucial things. And also, like, just bringing play and joy and making things relatable makes a huge difference. Think about it. It makes a difference for adults, right? Why wouldn't it make a difference for our young people? And spaces for them to grapple with, like, their own identity, reality, the world, like, share stories. And those human moments and relationships are so crucial between student to student, teacher to student, teacher to families. And I think putting relationships first is one of the most important things in order for our students to be successful and to really believe in themselves. And I always say, like, having whatever doors open they want, letting our students be the one to close doors, not society telling them that they don't meet a certain bar, but for them to be able to have choice in their future. And I believe we need to dismantle the whole system and, like, change a lot about it. But in the current world, where those are the systems we need to navigate, to then have those positions of power, like, that's what I agree.
Yeah, I think I am on that bar with you, or on that spectrum of dismantling, and I think we're in a moment right now, and I know the focus has been with the killing of George Floyd. There's been this awakening, and we're talking about the criminal justice system, and we're talking about policing, and this awakening that's happening as far as all of these conversations are happening. We're seeing how everyone is responding. Corporations are responding, and whether they mean it or not, like, I don't know if Target is here for profit or progress, but we are all having this conversation in this moment, and I would love it to shift to education in the same way that we're having this conversation about defund the police and what that means for people. And it means a lot of things to everybody right now, but can we shift the focus to really look at education as the root of all of these things that we're seeing? Like, that is the system that needs to be uprooted, because it's funneling and fueling all of these other aspects of how we deal with one another, how we live in society. And so, I'm hoping, and I was telling Tim when we were wrapping up with part one, I will hope this moment serves as a catalyst for that. I hope this conversation right now with us serves as a catalyst, a clarion call for that moment to happen right here in Hartford, if it can happen anywhere, right here in Hartford, where we shift that focus and say, if we want to be real about this, we're talking about institutional racism, we're talking about structures and barriers and systems. We have got to do this same thing with our education system and rebuild it and reimagine it in a way that addresses all of those other things.
Dr. Pierce talked today about changes to the edges of things for an illusion of progress, and he hopes that's not the case. I'm going to push the edges of education here a little bit. I heard rumors of a student walkout so they could demand a strong education, because students know that they're getting a poor education. Students know when they're in 11th grade and they get a 5th grade worksheet that it's a 5th grade worksheet. They know that. And one of the reasons our students don't show up is because they know that there's no purpose to showing up. So I would love to see student activism around education, not just police activity. But our students need to demand. I know they want it. I've seen it throughout the history of my time, 30 years in education. Students want it. It'd be great to see them start to demand, and or parents start to truly demand, an education that equals the value of each student. That's what we're trying to do at Community First School.
Michelle, I know you, with the Roots Conference, that's one of the things that you are building, that agency for students to speak out and be a part of this conversation as well. We were hoping to bring in, maybe we'll have to have a part 2. Or Pat, I know you also did a little bit in that area too, where we're bringing in the youth voice to this conversation, because they will be the drivers of this as well.
If you can get a kid to talk, he'll tell you what the problem is, and he can halfway tell you how to fix it if you listen to him. All right, you got to fill in the rest, but he'll tell you. I'd just like to comment on a couple of things that Dr. Stanley said in terms of seeing men. I know, and Dr. Rule could probably attest, and Dr. Stanley too. When a man says, when a young boy reaches a certain age, a man can say something to him, and a woman can say that exact same thing, and that boy hears that man more than he hears that woman. Now, I know that women have done phenomenal jobs in raising their sons. I know it. I know. But that man, listening to that man at a certain time is important. With our boys at the barn, and I had to acquiesce to that. My boys grow up to be 13, 14 years old, and I say something, they're like, okay, Miss Kelly, okay. We get Mr. Kelly to come in here, and this, I call him the Black John Wayne, the man of few words. Mr. Kelly walk in there, and all he has to do is do this. They got it. I'm cool, Mr. Kelly, got it. It's a difference. It is that man in atmosphere that when they get a certain age, they need that. And the other things, and how do we help kids? We have to find their strengths. Let them tell you what their strengths. If you watch them enough, they'll tell you what their strengths are. We had this young boy at our barn. He started when he was 6 years old. Fast forward, Rennie was now 16, never rode a horse, never wanted to ride a horse, but that boy could diagnose when a horse was sick. He knew exactly what to do for that horse. He knew how to feed that horse. If you ask Rennie anything about a horse, he could tell you chapter and verse. Never wanted to ride one. That was his strength. He would walk past the stall and say, Miss Kelly, I think that horse is going to be in colic tonight. And that's critical because that horse could be dead in 6 hours. And sure enough, there it is. So we got to let the kids tell us what their strengths are and build on that.
Naisha, I want to jump in for a quick minute and see if there were any questions.
Tim, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tim, you're muted. What are you talking about?
Yep, my bad. Let me
You're still on mute, Tim.
I got you. I'm unmuted. Sorry. I was going to say we're coming up on the last 15 minutes or so, and there may be questions that have come in through Facebook that we want to address, or YouTube. Also, we want to, one more time, we have more donations that have come in. We're very excited. We can show that screen again, too. If you've liked what you're hearing, you like the type of conversation we're having, we need your support. We're not funded by the state or the city. We're autonomous. We're independent. We're opening August 31st. If you could text to the number 44-321, and then in the message put CFS, capital CFS 2020, you will be given a link that will enable you to make a donation. The first 10 donations, I think, were passed out already. You get a free copy, a signed copy of Nicholas Pierce's Purpose Path book. And you can see on the screen now, if you don't want your name, just there's a box to check for anonymous. Right now we have everybody's names up there. No one checked anonymous. But we'd love to have your donations. We're going to keep this open for a week so that we can continue to have these types of conversations, not be afraid of repercussion, but actually bring this conversation to the community to hopefully not just start in Community First School, but to affect change on a larger scale. I'd love to push corporations, foundations, and others to demand change in the public system, for students and parents to demand change as to just allow the status quo. Now's the time for us to push that change because of George Floyd, because of COVID-19. We're already talking about not being in school full-time in the fall, some schools. We've already, as Community First, had a 50-50 model. We want our kids out in the community 50% of the time, working with their hands, learning to think critically, learning to be experiential in their thinking. We need to keep moving that direction with our students, giving them a real education, understanding their value. So if you have an opportunity to donate and give, please do. We'd love to have your support. I'll click back now to the Zoom meeting so you can see all of these lovely faces again. And Naisha, is there any question that you've seen on Facebook that we can toss out to the panel and let them handle in the last 12 or 13 minutes?
We don't have any questions. We have lots of comments, and the comments are definitely in support with what everyone is saying or has said in tonight. There's a lot of agreement about what we all want to see, and my phone battery just died. Just a lot of agreement from everyone. And so what that says to me is that we've identified what's wrong, and I believe we also identified the actual solution. We believe Community First School is a model or representative of that solution, or what that solution could be, or what that could look like. But I would just, in our final time together, if we all believe this, right? If we believe these things to be true, how do we act differently now that we are in this agreement, and we have people on Facebook saying, I agree with you, basically. If we really meant it, what would we do differently starting at 7:30 when we all sign off of here? And I'll throw that both to Dr. Rule and also Dr. Battle. I'm going to throw it out there to everyone. Like, if we really believe everything that we're saying here tonight, just name it. And I'm not calling you out individually, but I'm just saying, name it, put it out there in the universe. If we really believed it, what would we do differently starting at 7:30 tonight?
Are you asking anyone, or because I feel personally called out, Tim?
It's to everyone. It's to everyone, and the response is to the universe.
Go ahead, Tara. Go ahead. You got it. Take it.
No, I feel like personally called out, and I'm not going to go into a lot of it because, again, I was trying to separate, and I'm showing up tonight as a parent. But I think you're right, though. I think the way that funding has traditionally been done in communities needs to change. There's actually some, racism inside of funding models, right? And the way that philanthropy works, that needs to really be looked at. And then in terms of education, I think it's time now. If funders are just now becoming woke and waking up, and the momentum that's being built behind the movement right now, this is the time to really say, okay, we're going to start changing our practices and start really using our voice as funders to really create change. Funders have a lot of influence, and I don't know that they're using that influence right now in the education systems in the way that they can. And so that's one thing that I'm going to personally take back as my challenge and charge, to go back and say, hey, how are we using our power of our sphere of influence, our power, our power, to really impact change and not just fund the status quo? So that's one thing that I think we can do different. And I wanted to address, since Tim called me out earlier on the call.
My bad. Or good.
I think one of the real challenges, which is very difficult to implement, is that sometimes funders are in a rut and they fund failure. They have been funding large entities for years and years and years, and they continue to fail. That may come from the legislature. There's a fixation in their heads. So the challenge is how to call people out and say, look, do you realize you've been failing for 30 years? You've been at the wrong end for 30 years. Now it's time to consider something different. For example, one of the neat things about the school is that children are not always going to be stuck in a building. That needs to follow through not only in elementary, but in the middle school and certainly in the high school. There are some children that need to go somewhere, make some money during the day, and also get their education in the afternoon, maybe early evening. That's a different model. Now, you can't do everything at once, but one size doesn't fit all. So the model must be flexible with standards, with support. That's one piece of it. Another part to consider, which is extremely difficult, and I'm going to stand by this, there are funders that fund failure because of relationships. They know somebody, and they'll fund that entity. And the entity has been failing for years. So those funders must be challenged to begin to look at something that's new and different and innovative, which is successful.
I'm just going to respond just a second, and then I'll shut up so everybody else can go. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's relationships. There's also fear, right, in funding models, whether that's corporate, whether that's traditional philanthropy, whether that's government or whatever. There's a fear of, if we're too radical, who are we pissing off? What votes are we going to get? All of those things. Those are what customers are going to leave if we get too radical. There's a saying that I like to say, and it was actually a book, that the revolution will not be funded, right? Because funders get to control a lot of times, and it's not just funders, it's also board of directors, all the power structure. They get to control the narrative around things, and organizations can only go so far because funders are kind of holding the purse strings. And so that needs to change. And that's why I think what Tim is doing is super smart, and we've had the conversation, Tim, around having something that lives outside of traditional funding structures.
So, Dr. Stanley said something at our practice session, and he said, education is business.
Yeah.
And they in business to be in business. And people asking, can you please change your business? I don't think it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think one thing, we got to stop asking and just do it. Yep. They're not going to do it. There's too much money in it. But just like social media, us seeing George Floyd die, when people pick up what Community First School is doing and seeing the success, like Marva Collins, you think them funders are not going to jump on? They're media hounds. They'll be there. They'll be there. Stop asking. Just do it.
Yes.
Well, let me just say one other thing. I think it's important not to be afraid to ask for support from the community, financial support. And if it's worthy, then it'll be supported. Being creative in terms of how to do that, that's important. But it's important not to be afraid to ask. Because a funder will ask, well, how much support are you getting from the community? Can you give me a percentage? That's critical.
Michelle, Dr. Rule, I don't want to leave you out of our, we have about 5 minutes left. I didn't want to leave you out of our my closing comment. Or any other thought. You don't have to feel like you have to respond to that.
Yeah, my 2 cents would be not really about the structure, but more about the attention to the child, to let the child know that he or she is loved, is valued, and that the potential really is to the moon. And I also think that visualization helps. So if you speak positively to a child and help them to visualize what the future may look like or can look like, they can achieve it.
I guess the universe made sure that we got to go next to each other, because I was going to say, number one, just changing the approach to just treat students, the system. There are individual people who do this, but for the system and everyone within it to just treat students as human beings and really value them for who they are, what they bring to the table, and love them unconditionally and let them know that every single day. And that's through the way you teach, the experiences they have, the way you build relationships. So yeah, I was right on the same page with you. And another thing I would say is look at where, the case studies where this is happening in other places, and try to be in conversation with and learn from those models. So there's Dr. Bettina Love with abolitionist teaching. There's Ryan Parker over in Manchester Public Schools. There's what Curtis Acosta did down in Arizona. There's Flourish Agenda out in California, and there's a lot of other people here in Hartford who believe this and are working for this every day, and we're kind of like isolated with the way that structures are, right? But so really looking at those models of success and bringing together and learning from people, following them on Twitter, meeting them in real life, reading their books, being in community with other Harvard residents who are here doing the work, and really thinking about how we can collaborate and work on this together and learn from each other. Because it's hard, and it's something we can't do alone. And there's some really awesome people who are doing this work, and the stories are purposefully not stifled, but they're not very public, because if all of those stories manifest and come together, the system will change, right? So that would be mine.
That sounds like you just planned out our next summit. Thank you very much for that. Tim.
Well, I guess thank you, Gary and Michelle, for bringing us to that place, because our model is relationship-based with whole family care. That's sort of the foundation. And from there, we built a curriculum that was based upon the context of those we serve over just trying to force a curriculum content onto somebody. So it really does come from a high place of value for each student. Our mentors are Marva Collins and Maria Montessori and people of that nature who really believe in the intrinsic value of each person. So I appreciate you, Gary and Michelle, for wrapping us up with that. We're looking forward to support from each person on this panel. Each person here is an advisor in some capacity to the work we're trying to do. We're opening with 15 first graders on August 31st. Dr. Rule will be taking into consideration the different safety measures that you mentioned. We have a 2,500 square foot building. We'll be able to social distance appropriately. We have laundry and clothes washing facilities, a kitchen where we can prepare food in a healthy way. Our goal is to try to serve the family in a way that they deserve to be served, so that our expectations remain high for the children in this community to be great and to be leaders in our global society. So unless there's another comment, certainly always think to text 44321 CFS-2020 to 44321. That'll be up for a while. Thank you, everybody, for joining. That was a great hour and a half. Any last minute comments from anyone? Naisha, Gary, Dr. Battle?
I will just say we don't have to end this conversation.
That's right.
You know, you're watching this right now on Facebook, so you can DM me and we can continue this conversation. If you want to be involved in Community First School, our doors are open, and truly this is for community by community. And so the conversation doesn't have to end here tonight. And I will tag Tim on that too. He gets more phone calls than anyone I know about all of this stuff that we're building here in the city. So he can take more phone calls, but certainly reach out to any one of us, because I think we're all invested in seeing. And I'm very fortunate. I just want to say thank you. I as we were going through this dialogue, I was thinking to myself, you are all like national treasures right here in the city of Hartford. And I'm thankful that we are together in this space for however much longer God grants us. So I appreciate all of you, and I'm glad that our minds are combined on this particular effort. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.